Hello and welcome to the Lean ITSM channel. My name is David Smith. I'm the president of Micromation, and I will be your host for today's session, New Trends in IT Service Management Monitoring. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into your chat box, and we will refer to them at the end of the session, time permitting. This session is being recorded and will be made available for your reference as well. So let's get started. It's with my great pleasure I introduce to you our guest speaker, Diego Barrera. Diego is the director of Ozona Consulting, an IT consultancy that specializes in ISO 20000, ISO 20007 and 1, ISO 22301. Diego is also an ISO IEC 20000 lead auditor and APMG accredited trainer. And since 2005, he's participated in more than 30 ITIL and ISO 20000 implementation projects throughout Europe, 24 of whom are now certified in ISO 20000. Welcome, Diego. Take it away.
Thanks, David, for inviting me to this webinar. It's an honor for me to have this opportunity. Hello, everyone. Here you have the agenda for today's webinar. As you can see, we are about to cover mainly 4 topics. First, we will talk about service monitoring in general. Then, some differences between ITSM and BSM, different aspects or types of monitoring, and finally, what we consider the new trends in service monitoring for the near future. Of course, at the end, we will have some bibliography and tips on how to get it started. As it's usually said, copy from one is plagiarism, copy from many is research. We've tried to research a little bit, but of course, we want to give credit to all of our sources. So you will see footnotes referencing those sources. Apologies if we have missed any. Okay, let's get started. Just a few months ago, the key European IT Management Trends Report for 2016 was published. Among other topics, it tracks the key management concerns of more than 2,600 CIOs. Each participant has to choose 3 out of a list of about 40 options. Here you have the top 3. The third is the business productivity, which has been in the top 5 for the last few years, in the top 10 for some years, but with some more variation than the previous. And finally, the top priority, which is the alignment of IT and the business. It has been the top priority for more than 20 years in a row. This top priority is not only for Europe, it has been the same in every single continent. My first conclusion on this is that something seems not to be working quite well if year after year the top concern is still the same. Isn't there an improvement? Is the business asking for more and more to IT, so no matter how much IT improves, it's never enough? On the one hand, the dependency that the business has on IT is getting bigger and bigger. On the other hand, the lack of tools or processes or whatever else is not allowing that desired alignment. Both IT and the business have matured over the years, but the alignment between them is not maturing at the same pace. From the IT service management perspective, what can we do about it? As an example of the desired alignment between IT and the business, I usually use this example of a car dashboard. In my opinion, it's a very good example of hiding the technical stuff of the car and just providing a few key indicators useful for our driving. Let me highlight a few ideas. First, no matter in which country we are, no matter in which model of car we use, we will understand this dashboard with almost no effort. Indicators are standardized. Second, there is a mix of real-time and historical indicators. Some of them make sense in real time, some make sense as aggregated values over time, and even some of them are predictive. Third, we don't really care about how these indicators are calculated, but we are confident that they are accurate. And fourth, at least in my case, I don't usually pay much attention consciously, but it wouldn't feel comfortable if this information was not available at any time that I look at it. Will I be exceeding the speed limits? Will I have enough gas to reach my destination? The standardized indicators allow comparisons with ourselves over time and also with others, what we call benchmarking. What about the information that IT provides to the business or even inside IT? What about the information that IT provides to the top management? Do we provide easily understandable indicators to the business, hiding technical aspects? Unfortunately, this is what we see in many IT organizations. First, we have no indicators, or if we have them, they are not standard. We need to learn how to use them. Second, also if we have them, almost no one of them is near real time. Third, can we be confident about their accuracy? And fourth, we don't even expect to have that information available all the time. We expect to receive it from time to time in reports. Let me go even a bit deeper on this, showing you some conclusions of our research conducted in the last few years among European organizations providing IT services, both to internal and external customers. Though it's mainly focused on Europe, I think that the conclusions can be easily extrapolated to the rest of the world. Let me highlight also that I am excluding from this analysis the information security management to focus in support and provision ITSM processes. Out of the sample, 42% of the organizations are not service-oriented at all and don't manage their services in a consistent way according to ITSM best practices. In other words, they really don't care or don't know about ITSM frameworks, standards, or best practices. They work mainly in a best effort approach, if any. Then there is a 21% of organizations that focus mainly in incident and service request management, and their incident and service request catalogs are not necessarily aligned to IT services. Another 12% perform some tasks related to other management processes such as configuration management, change management, etc., with different levels of success. However, they don't work in processes such as service level management, availability management, or capacity management, which are those more related to monitoring. Another 12% perform some monitoring tasks mainly related to availability and performance. However, we consider that this monitoring is focused on operational aspects and is not service-oriented. 5% don't have a full service management system based on ISO 20000, ITIL, or any other ITSM framework that allows to interconnect the processes and share information among them. In fact, according to Gartner, even after more than 10 years, best practice process frameworks such as ITIL or COVID have not been leveraged correctly by 90% of the organizations. Finally, less than 1% consider that they provide useful and enough information about IT to the business to support decision making. I wish that many of you are already in that remaining 1%. If so, congratulations. Please don't disconnect from the webinar. If your company belongs to the other 99%, I hope you will find here some useful insights to complete the journey to that alignment. We will use the basic principles of service orientation and service modeling as suggested by ITIL and ISO 20000, reorganizing our existing applications and systems as a set of IT services. As we have seen in the previous slides, more than 50% of the organizations providing IT services still have not properly defined IT services, not have identified the match between IT services and the business processes. As an initial step, we'll assume that we are able to reorganize our IT as a list of services, both for internal and or external customers. We don't consider that this is an easy step, as we've seen many organizations where this was not that correctly accomplished. We will assume also that there is consensus among IT about what those services mean and that they have been identified also with the participation of the business, so they are meaningful for them. Once we have this, let's move to the next step. Let's define what service level management is. We will be using the latest available ITIL and ISO 20000 definitions. In the case of ISO 20000, we are including the text of the working draft 3 of the new version of ISO 20000 that will be published sometime around 2018. According to ISO 20000, the organization and the customer shall agree the services to be delivered. This is not straightforward if more than 60% of the organizations don't have a clear list of services identified, as we saw before. Then it says that the organization shall establish one or more SLAs for each service delivered. and that those SLAs have to include service levels that have to be monitored. ITIL goes a bit beyond, asking for all IT service management processes to be appropriate for the agreed service level targets. Let's see now the definition of SLA. ISO 20000 defines an SLA as a documented agreement between the organization and the customer that identifies the services and the service levels. ITIL definition depends on the same idea. The SLA describes the IT service and the documented service level targets. If we go back to the conclusions of our research, out of the organizations that have IT services defined and some kind of SLAs in place, who is in charge of the SLA monitoring? In 45% of the cases, the only SLA reporting is made by suppliers. Then another 39% manually generate some report to monitor and review the service levels. Then 12% have the process partially automated, and only 4% consider that the process is fully automatic. Asking about the sources of those SLA monitoring reports, 95% uses only historical data. Almost 5% includes some kind of real-time indicators, and only 0.2% include also some kind of predictive indicator in the SLA calculation. Going back to the car analogy, it is as if we were driving just by looking into the rear mirror. Shall we spend some time trying to change this, or are we okay as we are? In order to have a valid analogy with the car dashboard, we consider that at least we should have our list of services organized by their service level. Worst service level in the top, best service level in the bottom. So we can focus on the services that have some issues. If those services have been defined, taking into account the business impact, we could even reorganize these services with low service level according to those priorities to guarantee the alignment with the business. I am suggesting to organize the services by their service level, but I haven't given any definition of what service level is. If we go to ISO 20000, we don't find any definition. One has to be added soon. However, in ITIL, it is defined as the measured and reported achievement against one or more service level targets. And if we go to the definition of service level target, we see that it is any commitment that is documented in the SLA. So, at the end of the day, whatever we want. In this figure, we see the most typical service level targets included in SLAs. Availability appears about 78% of the times. Resolution times of service requests and incidents appear almost 50% of the times. Other response times as first call resolution, first level resolution, response times, etc. appear about 37% of the times. And finally, the fourth most typical category is about performance over capacity, appearing 21% of the times. In 1970, Norman K. Denzin defined triangulation as using more than two methods to collect data in the context of gathering and using research data, with the objective of reducing, if not eliminating, bias in the research. Denzin defines four types of triangulation: data source, using multiple data sources; investigator, using more than one person to collect, analyze, and interpret a set of data; theory, using multiple perspectives to interpret a set of data; and method, using multiple methods to capture the data. A couple of years ago, in a conversation with the American author Martin Klobuck, he made me realize that I was applying triangulation all the time. Applying this concept to monitoring, it can be defined as using several different measurements to compose a complex metric or indicator. Having several different methods and data sources can be seen as something negative because we can obtain conflicting results. However, it can also be seen as something positive. So if we have one measurement that for some reason is showing us a wrong value, the effect can be compensated by the other measurements. So if we apply triangulation to the SLA definition, we need to have at least three different aspects to be tracked. We suggest to follow ITIL and ISO 20000 processes to identify at least three key elements in our SLAs. One could be the service availability, second could be the service capacity or performance, and the third, an indicator aggregating the overall quality of our service desk. Following this approach, we could have 4 indicators for each of our services. One about the availability of the service, one about the performance or capacity of the service, one about the overall quality of the service desk, and as a calculation of these 3, as a formula over them, we can have the service level. So it is up to us to have a look exclusively at the service level, and when we have some kind of issue, look why is it generated, if it's because of the availability, because of the capacity, or because of the service desk, or more than one of them. Or we can have different views exclusively for availability, for capacity, or for service desk. When identifying our services, it is also important that we know which of the services have a direct interface with the final customer. Those services are called customer-facing services. The rest of the services are also important, as an issue in any of them can have some effect on those customer-facing services. So, as our services are not isolated and they depend on others, it's important for each of them to identify which are the external dependencies and the internal dependencies. External dependencies are provided by external suppliers. Internal dependencies are provided by other areas of our company. If we are able to identify the dependencies that each of our services has, for instance, because they are identified in a CMDB, we can take those impact relationships into account when calculating metrics at the service level. A service may not be available because one of its pieces, CIs, critical assets, or whatever, is forcing that unavailability, or it might be caused by a dependency on a service that is not available. The cause and effect paths are very important to track service values and identify root causes. Although I won't cover it in detail, another key aspect to monitoring is identifying those inner pieces of the service that can affect the service itself. Is what we call the service modeling. Using once again a CMDB as a source of information, or just by modeling the service manually, we have the remaining blocks to support our monitoring, the service modeling and the dependencies. After identifying services, their dependencies, and the architecture of each service, we have to decide which information we want to provide to our top management and to the business. That should be done defining a measurement framework. Our host today, David Smith, is the author of one of the best books in the market about this topic, so I strongly recommend you to read it. For the purposes of this webinar, I will only say that our measurement framework should define several dimensions of analysis. First of all, the service dimension. If we are managing IT services, we have to be able to provide information per service. Then, the information can be structured in other dimensions, such as the process dimension. As you have seen, I've been already using the process dimension to provide the information about the services. Of course, other dimensions can be added to make our measurement model more robust and complete. As you may have realized, I haven't talked about tools yet. It was on purpose. In my opinion, it is the process which is key to the success and not the tools. Of course, we will need several tools to calculate indicators at the service level, and this won't be an easy task. There are many different infrastructure monitoring tools, and they report different types of data. We can get states as red, yellow, green, numeric values from 0 to 100, numeric values in general, events, alerts, etc. Our approach can be as simple as the value of the service is the worst of the values of the internal elements and the dependencies, or it can be something more elaborated and closer to the reality. Depending on the tools and the resources we have, our model will be more or less advanced. However, I really think that something is better than nothing. So I strongly recommend to start looking for ways of reporting indicators at surface level, no matter if initially they are gathered manually or if we don't have sources enough to have triangulation applied. It is said that ITSM tools are replaced every 3 to 5 years. I would dare to say that in many cases the reason is that they were never implemented properly. It is the frustration of not achieving the promised objectives rather than the tools not being powerful enough for their purpose. In our approach, having a clear understanding of what we want to achieve is the key to select the right tools and implement the right measurement framework. In this diagram, you see several different types of monitoring tools. Ones are applied mainly to hardware servers and devices, others are specific for software or to manage and monitor some specific technology. Finally, there are several types of tools whose objective is monitoring the user experience and the end-to-end performance. If we have correctly modeled our services, we may need several of these types of tools to properly monitor our services. If we have a look at the availability management process in ISO 20000, we will see that it just says that the availability of the services shall be monitored to verify if the service availability requirements are met. So, once again, we have some degree of freedom to identify what availability is. The same happens about capacity. ISO 20000 just asks us to monitor capacity at usage and guarantee sufficient resources to fulfill requirements. So, how to monitor service availability? In many organizations, we see just a reactive interpretation of service availability. No news means good news, so everything but unavailability will be considered availability. Depending on the maturity of the organization, a service will be unavailable only if there is an incident registered saying so, or if some monitoring tool is giving us an alert, or a calculation of both. We recommend moving to a proactive interpretation using a calculation on several sources, applying triangulation, taking into account component availability, service end-to-end availability, and user experience, dependencies, etc. Though tools for monitoring infrastructure usually provide availability and capacity metrics, only organizations with higher levels of maturity are reporting the capacity and performance of the IT services. Capacity management is usually implemented in a reactive way, defining capacity thresholds and alerts when those thresholds are reached. Once again, our recommendation is to evolve to a proactive interpretation, taking into account the evolution of capacity values of service components over time, user experience tools, or synthetic transactions to simulate the user behavior. When talking about monitoring services quality, I strongly recommend you to have a look at the many Bright Talk presentations by Jeff Grunberg from MetricNet. The figure shows an example based on MetricNet's balanced scorecard builder for service desks, applying the triangulation technique to calculate a synthetic indicator of the overall quality of service desk. Of course, many other metrics can be used, but I think this is a very good example. In the early 2000s, a new generation of tools called BSM, Business Service Management, emerged in the market. Their objective was to automate all this process that we have just described, create a visual representation of each service, define the dependencies, read the different monitoring sources to gather data, perform some online calculations on the input data, and calculate service values to be easily consumed in customized dashboards and executive reports. However, there were some confusions about what BSM really was. Many understood that they were just a new generation of tools. Main ITSM vendors, in fact, already offered at that moment or had just acquired BSM platforms. Others understood that BSM was mainly a new way of thinking. BSM is a term used to describe the strategic direction required for ITSM to be successful. According to Peter Armstrong of BMC, BSM is a mindset, not a product set. BSM is not primarily about new software. How you approach the management of IT is what is the key. In 2003, Gartner identified the main benefits that BSM tools should provide. Visual representation of the dependencies between the business processes, the business applications, and the IT infrastructure, to give the IT an understanding on the business impact of a component outage so that they can better prioritize operational tasks, reduced downtime and shorter problem resolution time because IT support focuses on solving the correct high-priority business-relevant issues, operational efficiency because operators can use a single console for viewing the state of business services as well as for displaying IT infrastructure views, business service views that can be customized and enabled for viewing business by business users, and greater credibility with the business. However, Gartner included the warning: this is only for mature, service-oriented organizations. If not, you will have a very powerful tool to do nothing. In this slide, we summarize the elements in a BSM approach. Different sources of information provide data that is processed by the BSM engine to provide customized dashboards and reports to the business and non-business users. As we said, BSM requires the construction of logical relationships among business priorities, the IT infrastructure, and the applications that support them, near real-time end-to-end service modeling, and dashboards and reports. The difficulties is that they require long deployment time, re-engineering of some management processes, and integrating monitoring information from many different sources. Another inconvenience for BSM is that it doesn't fit ITIL terms. According to ITIL, business service management is performed by the business unit. What Gartner called business services are business-oriented IT services, or according to ITIL definitions, customer-facing services. As we also said, there was also the confusion about what was the exact definition of BSM. Something analogous to IT service management, just a set of tools, or a new way of thinking to improve ITSM towards oriented services for the business. Here we have the evolution of BSM in Gartner's hype cycle. It appeared first in the hype cycle for IT operations management, then in the ITSM 2.0. It shows the evolution that most of the technologies follow since they appeared in the market. As we can see, from 2007 to 2015, the expectations about BSM were clearly down to the trough of disillusionment. While other technologies frequently grow out of this position, Gartner doesn't consider that BSM will. In March of this year, Gartner published a research note suggesting to abandon BSM initiatives and replacing them with other approaches. The reason to say this is that BSM has not delivered on its promises to prioritizing, communicating, and focusing IT resources on the functions critical to the business. So, low adoption, complexity, deficiencies in underlying technologies, general confusion regarding the definition of what a business service is, limited understanding of business needs, etc. Gartner suggests to replace BSM with two different approaches. Business value dashboards to provide executive dashboards to the business, but without the underlying understanding of the internals of the services, and IT operations analytics and monitoring tools to provide the operational intelligence. This is just a visual representation of that evolution suggested by Gartner, where IT operations management tool is split in three different categories of tools: availability and performance, ITSM 2.0, and automation. To understand the difference, business value dashboards and their underlying business value metrics are about starting with identifying business performance measures and data and link them back to IT. So it uses a top-down approach. BSM, on the other hand, uses a bottom-up approach starting on IT. While Gartner says this, a new generation of BSM tools is reaching the market. Well, they don't call themselves really BSM tools, but in fact they are. They use terms such as full-stack monitoring instead, but they are clearly a 2.0 generation of BSM tools. As a common characteristic of these new tools, we can say that they add some out-of-the-box intelligence, simplifying the implementation and the outcomes, providing also more advanced insights based on artificial intelligence algorithms. Taking this into account, I would call this new generation of BSM tools as BSI, Business Service Intelligence, or Business-Oriented Service Intelligence. The initial report we mentioned at the beginning identifies analytics and business intelligence as the top area to invest in the short term. So, good news for the vendors of these new tools. This diagram summarizes both approaches as the evolution of the existing BSM tools. Returning for the last time to the car analogy, we expect our monitoring to support our business, giving us warnings as early as possible. That's why, in some roads, some kind of soundbars were added in the sidelines. This way, when our car reaches the sideline, we hear a warning sound and we still have some margin to react. Without them, the result for sure would be much worse. Simplifying a bit, we can call historical monitoring to any measurement about the past units of time. We will call real time to measurements that we can identify with an unit of time where we consider we are in. So real time is not necessarily instantaneous. And we will consider predictive monitoring to any measurement of the expected future behavior, so we can estimate in advance our future performance. The new generation of business service intelligence tools try to cover the three types of monitoring. As we said, not always the calculations are that complex as in all BSM tools, and sometimes dependency analysis is reviewed or even replaced by automatic and machine learning algorithms. Summarizing so far, we've seen that maturity in ITSM is lower than desired. Service orientation, service modeling, service and business process dependencies, etc. We've seen also the low adoption of BSM due to complexity, price, lack of methodology, etc. And we've seen two alternative approaches. Let's have a look now to some of the new trends that are being added to the new business service intelligence tools. Valid yet simpler approaches than classical BSM, machine learning and deep learning, automation and self-repair, big data and real-time analytics, and automatic interpretation in natural language. As we already said, BSM is a way of thinking. That way of thinking may evolve while keeping its core characteristics. In the beginning of this presentation, we said that IT and the business alignment is still an issue, that many companies fail or even don't attempt to implement a BSM approach. Then, we may need to simplify the approach. What about using the top-down approach that Gartner suggests for business value dashboards? Or maybe we should follow an even more flexible approach using a top-down, bottom-up, or a mixed approach depending on the service modeling we do of each service. What about also standardizing some basic outcomes? BSM aims to provide custom business-driven dashboards to the users. But what if we predefine some dashboards or some reports for the most useful roles in the organization? That would be an easy entry point for many organizations, opening their eyes to new features that can be implemented in the future. Supervised artificial intelligence techniques, such as machine learning or unsupervised as deep learning, are starting to be applied to many ITSM and BSM components. Dependency management, events, for instance, if an event expected or not, machine learning and other artificial intelligence techniques to anomaly detection, root cause analysis, relating issues to recent requests for changes, etc. New techniques for automation of self-repair, such as predictive monitoring, signal detection, and other process control detection techniques, automatic corrective actions, proactive alerts, and self-repair. And even the use of the big data and real-time analytics, storing millions and millions of data, even to simulate real-time analysis of the past, we can use some kind of timeline to move back and see what was happening, extracting the key events and the key actions that happened. We can use it also to simulate the scenarios once we have modeled or inferred the architecture of our services and their dependencies. We can simulate what would happen if some server or some service is down, and we can see without having that issue what would be the effect. And finally, the automatic interpretation in natural language. This is an area of research where I've been personally involved in the last few years. Imagine that we have, for instance, a report like this with more or less effort to calculate it. Imagine that we can add automatically an interpretation in natural language of what's happening. In the case of our report, for instance, in this case, it may interest us to compare the last month with the previous month to see the trends. Also, if we are achieving or not our service targets, and explain the cause, which is the root cause of some unavailability, of some lack of capacity or whatever. This automatic interpretation in natural language does not need to be limited to reports. It could be used also in notifications, and even in dashboards, providing extra information on the interpretation of what's happening. Very useful for different types of users.
And this is all from my side. Here you have a few tips to learn more, but bibliography. First of all, ISO 15939, which is a standard about measurement, stating what a measurement is, what an indicator is. I really recommend it. Then ISO 20000 and ITIL, of course. Then 3 books for you to have a reference on how to implement some of the tasks we have defined, and most of the Gartner research notes and reports we've been using. Finally, and also to summarize, I would like to review which are, in our opinion, the tips on how to get started. First, what we have to do is to define our IT services, define the inner architecture of those services and the dependencies between the services, then assess the business value of those services to identify priorities. We don't need to work in all the services. We can do just a small subset of them. Then define measurement frameworks for the services, identifying the dimensions which are interesting for us. Then identify available tools to provide data, measure the service quality and performance using some kind of calculation based on that data and the measurement framework, and of course improving, trying to implement corrective actions and other kind of actions that help us to have a clear understanding and a closer approach to reality. Thank you so much. I will hand over now to David.
Diego, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Lots of information there to consider. I would like to thank everybody for joining us today, and if you would be so kind to rate this session so we can use your feedback to improve future sessions. And by the way, please join us tomorrow if you're interested in the topic using Lean IT metrics to streamline ITSM, and next month on the Lean ITSM channel and DevOps channel to learn continuously about different practices to improve ITSM. Diego, I really appreciate you taking the time to share this information with us today, and look forward to hearing other topics in the future. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and I bid you goodwill. Thank you.